essentially a very positive mood. You can think of it as a combination of low frequency harmonics that are in a consonant relationship. So essentially, it's kind of this checkerboard pattern that essentially is constructing, these evolutionary selection pressures for thought patterns that will be themselves much more harmonious. Whereas when you're in a very stressed, anxiety-ridden or depressed state of consciousness, that would be kind of like dissonant configurations of those harmonic waves. And the reason, that would like facilitate essentially, or would be adaptive, is that then like it provides evolutionary selection pressures for particular patterns that are like more asymmetrical, more jagged, more sheared, more pinchy. And if you think about like, okay, what is the sort of like sensations that you have when you are like upset or something like that, you will notice there's like a lot more kind of like angular shapes and sharp objects and things like that, as opposed to very, very blissful state of consciousness where things are in some metaphorical sense much more round and coherent with one another.
The scientific revolution starts now.
This is the Science Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
Can you explain that quadrant system you have for talking about these states of consciousness? Because you have this very simple way of, not to at all deride it. It's quite fascinating, but you have a fairly simple way of looking at the emotional landscape in this Cartesian map. We'll throw it up on the podcast later. We'll edit it in. But can you explain that to people so that they describe it? Describe it. Yeah.
There might be a couple things you're referring to. There's one Cartesian plane, which is valence and arousal.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Okay, very classic, affective psychology construct, which is derived from, empirically. Actually, what you can do is ask people to kind of like rate their experiences over time. And if you do a principal component analysis on that type of data, usually two factors emerge, or two principal components. One is arousal, essentially, the level of activation, how much energy.
This is the hot sauce.
That is the hot sauce, yeah. Or one of the key effects of the hot sauce. And then you have the valence, which is how good or bad the experience feels. And, there's a lot of research on arousal. And like, for example, you can use your Apple Watch to kind of like estimate your level of arousal. The thing that is a lot less researched is the valence component and actually what constitutes valence. And I think what makes QRI special is that we have a theory of valence. And the theory of valence is actually pretty exotic in a way. Because, if you ask a neuroscientist, like what is pleasure, you will usually get one of the following responses. You will say, here's something like, it's like when dopamine gets activated in your pleasure centers or something like that, or it has something to do with opioids or serotonin. There's kind of that class of explanations. There's also kind of like functional localization. It's kind of like, reduced amygdala activity.
Like this nucleus changes the way that it behaves relative to this nucleus.
Exactly. But just because you call something a pleasure center doesn't mean you have an explanation, right? So,
do you know the work of Michael Levin?
Yes.
This seems structurally similar to the work of Michael Levin, where he's like, from a philosophical standpoint, you can't just look at the molecular bumpings up of things in biology and be like, well, that's the explanation. There's some kind of larger behavior that forms the action that you see, and you can only understand it through this interrelationship of forms. And it seems like you're doing this for valence.
Yeah, that's right. The most preferred explanation for a lot of people is kind of a algorithmic explanation. This idea of pleasure is reinforcement. We're all reinforcement learning algorithms instantiated in wetware, and what's pleasant is whatever is reinforcing. But that's actually empirically not the case. There's like a lot of things that are really pleasant but are not reinforcing, and vice versa. At QRI, our theory is actually the thing that makes the experience pleasant or not is the structure of the experience. And the more symmetrical the structure, the more pleasant it is.
What is this?
Yeah, what do you mean by structure of an experience? Sorry.
I totally get it. It's the exact question.
You mean the way that you parameter, like the parameterization of it, or do you mean the electrical signal itself as viewed as like the waves themselves of electricity through the brain, or
like when you say structure, the thing that comes to mind for me, and I want to see how close this gets, is that I imagine that in this kind of pleasure, in this positive state, you have some kind of increase in permittance where waves are able to move through the brain in some way, in an easier way. Either you open ion channels and like the flow of water is easier, or salt moves faster. I don't know. I just I see a physical object that's somehow responding.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's roughly that is the vibe.
Okay, good.
Absolutely. So one property of experience, for example, is the viscosity of experience. Essentially, it's kind of like what is the kind of like statistical level of effort and resistance that is inside you. And oftentimes that is highly correlated with like the presence of like internal conflicts or, internal inconsistencies. You can have a very viscous experience. Yeah, that would be an unpleasant experience for the most part. Whereas if you look at like high-end equanimity practices, people literally say, their experience becomes completely fluid. Like there's no resistance in their experience. And when the resistance drops to zero, the suffering drops to zero as well. And at QRI, we actually, we are physicalists. So we actually think that states of, consciousness and physics are actually the same thing at a very deep level. So that, a lot of the properties of your experience will ultimately be captured by, physical constants, like what is the degree of, resistance, or you were mentioning permittivity or things like viscosity. A very, very important concept is this of impedance matching. Maybe a little bit of a background for that is like, if you play a guitar string completely unconnected, kind of disembodied in the air, it's going to sound really, really quiet. But if you attach it to an acoustic guitar, all of a sudden it's actually going to be really loud, right? And like that's very puzzling because like how come like attaching something will make the string louder? And like it sounds kind of like energy came out of the blue, but actually what is going on is that the energy is the same. It's just that it's being discharged a lot faster because the string is going to make vibrate the entire guitar. And so actually the sound of a guitar is the sound of the guitar vibrating, not the sound of the string vibrating. So basically that is called impedance matching. You're kind of providing this intermediate medium between something that is vibrating at a very high frequency so they can actually spread its energy to the environment. So impedance matching is something we've looked at in, as an explanatory framework, and it seems to explain quite a bit in, for example, psychedelic states of consciousness, as well as like meditation. That like a key aspect of internal harmonization is actually increasing impedance matching, so that you can the frequencies essentially can become in sync with one another.
Are you aware of anybody who's done any biophysical work about this idea of like decreased, like who's actually able to measure these qualitative feelings? Like, are you guys partnering with anybody who's done that, or is there some like programs that
like, is there somebody with electrodes on their head sitting somewhere?
Yeah, or who is able to actually measure? I know you talk about like this symmetry idea, this brainwave symmetry. Are people measuring that? Or maybe you can say a little bit about that idea.
Yeah. So maybe it would be helpful to explain that at QRI we do three things. So, well, really there's like kind of like three levels of abstraction that we care about, and then there's like three objectives. So it ends up being kind of like a 3x3 matrix. But the layers are essentially we do philosophy, straight up philosophy of mind. Like actually engaging with philosophers of mind. People like David Chalmers or Daniel Dennett. Actually kind of like working at that level is something that we do. Then we also do neuroscience. So like one of the key paradigms that we look at is this one. It's called connectome-specific harmonic wave analysis, that essentially interprets the behavior, the activity of brain as a superposition of resonant modes. And there's like a lot of fascinating work in that area. The idea came up was invented by this researcher called Selen Atasoy, who did a bunch of work on that on Oxford, on LSD and other psychedelics and anesthetics. But the idea of harmonic resonance in the brain is like somewhat older. Like there's people like Stephen Lehar, like a pretty amazing like psychonaut and cognitive scientist who wrote about harmonic resonance in the brain. So we at TRI, we have kind of like an internal, somewhat of a fork of like the Celan-Atasoy paradigm of connecting specific harmonic waves. Essentially, we're like doing something very similar, except we think we're like fixing a couple mistakes. But I mean, essentially, it's like roughly the same idea. And yeah, the data says that we are really interested in that we analyze are things like peak meditation experiences, and if all goes right, we will be able to analyze MDMA data as well. Not that we collect it, but like another lab collected, and we're very likely to collaborate with them.
And what are you seeing more resonant behaviors in some of these more valent states?
The main effect, at least with this technique, is higher energy across the spectrum. So essentially, across all frequencies, the amplitude gets higher. So it's kind of like, if your brain has all of these resonant modes, essentially on LSD, you essentially have like more energy in all of those harmonics. So you're kind of like in an energized state of consciousness, but especially so for like the high frequency harmonics. And they confirmed that this is the case with LSD and DMT and ketamine. Whereas with a propofol or like anesthetics is actually the opposite. You essentially get like a broad spectrum reduction of the amplitude of the harmonics, and especially so in the high frequencies. So that is like a pretty robust pattern. As to like, whether, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, are there theories about those different frequencies and their role and behavior? Like, are people speculating about what high frequency resonant modes are contributing to in terms of behavior? Do people try to, do they correlate them with different behaviors? Or is this like, it's very difficult to get people to behave different ways? And
well, no, there's a couple of things I can say. So some specific frequencies essentially are much more loaded in specific parts of the brain. So for example, like around like 10 hertz or so, like those frequencies are like very, very heavily tuned to the visual cortex. So there's kind of like some way of like, okay, like you can tune into different parts of the brain by dialing different frequencies in a way. But this is not going to be perfect. I mean, it's not like, okay, each specific part of the brain actually has like an address or something like that, because the resonance is still a holistic effect. It's still like the entire brain resonating. It's just that there's more of a loading in a particular component of it. But then my co-founder, Mike Johnson, has speculated quite a lot about the role of like various frequencies. And I mean, to a first approximation, we would have like the very low frequencies. I mean, it's similar to sound. Like the very low frequencies are kind of like waves of energy that go through walls and across corners, and so in a very straightforward way, they would be very well suited for carrying the priors of your essentially your statistical priors, meaning like your expectations. Whereas the high frequencies are much more localized, where like high frequency sound, you close the door in a party and like you will hear the low frequencies, but not the high frequencies. So the high frequencies tend to be much more localized, and they would be much more likely to actually carry the semantic content, like the actual details of the information. And the low frequencies too, what we speculate on and we're trying to test is they would carry more of the mood component. So essentially a very positive mood. You can think of it as a combination of low frequency harmonics that are in a consonant relationship. So essentially it's kind of this checkerboard pattern that essentially is constructing, these evolutionary selection pressures for thought patterns that will be themselves much more harmonious. Whereas when you're in a very distressed, anxiety-ridden or depressed state of consciousness, that would be kind of like dissonant configurations of those harmonic waves. And the reason, that would like facilitate essentially, or would be adaptive, is that then like it provides evolutionary selection pressures for particular patterns that are like more asymmetrical, more jagged, more sheared, more pinchy. And if you think about like, okay, what is the sort of like sensations that you have when you are like upset or something like that, you will notice there's like a lot more kind of like angular shapes and sharp objects and things like that, as opposed to very, very blissful state of consciousness where things are in some metaphorical sense much more round and and coherent with one another.
I might not have caught this, but you said that there were 3 different paths, and you said the philosophy of mind was one, neuroscience was the other, and then did we get to the third one?
No, we didn't. Thank you. It's neurotechnology. So, yeah, and like the thing that we are interested in is especially non-invasive. So the way we have studied this space is by combining. I'm just wondering. Yeah, by combining light, sound, and body vibration. We call it LSV stimulation, and it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, like listening to a song that you really like compared to listening to that song together with body vibration that is in synchrony with the song, that is kind of rendering the song in a different channel. It adds something like 60% enjoyment or something.
Is that like hooking a speaker up to your body, basically? How do you do that?
Or like going to a concert, like having them play it really loud?
Concert, yeah.
I mean, that, at least prior to the last 2 years, that's probably why.
That's exactly one way, like to get really close to a very giant speaker, put like earplugs so that you don't go that for.
I mean, that's why people love concerts, right? Because objectively, if you were to sit down and you were to be like, look, which versions of this song is the most accurate representation of the song? It's probably the album version. But people still love to go to concerts, and they love to stand in front of the speakers and be vibrated, because it is exactly like basically hooking yourself up to a speaker, like you said.
Yeah, it's the same with like playing music or something too. Like it's fun to just play acoustic guitars and stuff, but like to really just like plug into something loud and play with a drummer and just like really like feel it in your body. It's really fascinating.
Live music doesn't catch until there's a drummer. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen somebody on stage playing a guitar. It's like, it's nice. It sounds pretty. Even if it's, something that's like very, very ornate and truly excellent, there's a different level that you get to if there's percussion, if there's something that's grabbing you as it happens. I think you're totally right.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it definitely makes sense, within a kind of our Valence paradigm. The vibration, the way we do it is with, first of all, we experiment a lot with a commercial product called the Stub Pack. And I highly recommend actually getting one. Like, it's like $300 or something like that. It's amazing. Like, you plug it in to the music, and it's going to render all of the frequencies between 0 or between like 10 and 200 hertz into like body vibration. So some songs like play way better in it than others if they have kind of like a very heavy bass component, and especially if the bass component is compatible with your body. And like there's some things that sound really good but don't feel good, and vice versa. There's some songs that sound good and feel amazing. So like you can. I can give an example of a song like that in the link or something like that. But afterwards, we actually created custom hardware for it. Like, we created like these big pillows with transducers inside that essentially, you can make vibrate in all sorts of ways, and create this amazing, essentially similar to auditory illusions or visual illusions. You can make tactile illusions with this sort of setup. You can make kind of activate various. So if you have like a pillow in your head, a pillow in your chest, and a pillow in your legs, you can make each of the pillows activate at a time, and it creates the illusion of kind of like a rolling wave that goes through your body. So even though it's discrete, it actually feels much more continuous. And the full setup is actually like one pillow in the head, one pillow in the legs, 2 sub packs, then a stroboscopic stimulation and high quality audio, and all of that put together, and then creating custom songs specifically for that setup. And the effect is really strong. I mean, like, we've had people say that they were able to process a very difficult traumatic memory in like a span of like 15 minutes in a way that is like similar to, for example, like a ketamine trip or something like that.
What's up with that? Like, what are people just like, is this like a theory of blockage or something? Like, what's the psychology behind that? Just that, like, the tension that's in our bodies and in our electrical and tactic, haptic resonance is just like literally causing resistance in being able to? Are we not relaxed enough to be able to process bad things? Like, what is that? What's going on?
All of those are some excellent guesses. And so here's what what I have. I mean, there's so much more to say, but like, the first approximation, yes, like there's this issue of impedance matching. So like you can have like essentially like an anxiety or like a worry really, or like a trauma, like stuck in your body in a way that self-reinforces, that doesn't dissipate its stress to the rest of the nervous system. So essentially something that is kind of like an echo chamber and like nothing can really undo it. Sometimes it's actually worse. Like when you try to undo it, you're actually energizing it and reinforcing it, which is why, I think like a lot of the times actually just like talking about something traumatic can make it worse because you're just relieving the memory without like having kind of a high valence, pillow to kind of cushion it and prevent it from like self-reinforcing. But yeah, if you explore a traumatic memory on MDMA or on ketamine or on kind of the LSD setup, essentially in each of those experiences, one of the key things that happens is that you have kind of a new medium of wave propagation gets activated in your nervous system, or that's what it feels like. So whereas before, kind of like your waves of attention maybe met kind of like had a blockage, or like we're not able to kind of go all the way through. In this new medium, on ketamine, it might feel like, your nervous system became gelatin or something like that. Yeah, like the vibrations will go through your entire body in that alternative medium that is not your normal medium.
Well, the medium is still the same, but you've added something to it, right? Like the medium of gelatin is still water, but you've just happened to add you've added this like structure that like vibrates within it. And so I imagine that we spend a lot of time thinking about these kind of biomechanical understandings of things like quantum physics. And so here it seems like what it is that the interaction between the ketamine molecules and the chemistry of your body is creating a structure that has different material properties, if you will.
Yes, absolutely.
And I wanted to just add too, by the way, in case people are like listening to this, like what,
what are these people talking about?
This is like legit stuff with the depression cures. Like there's some crazy studies coming out of like these hard-hitting universities about especially with psilocybin. I've seen a lot of these lately. Also the ketamine I saw too with regard to post-traumatic stress disorder, soldiers coming back. I've heard a number of stories from soldiers about their experiences with this stuff. Like, it works for sure. So, we're sitting around here trying to speculate as to why it works, but there seems to be almost no question at this point that it is useful in actually breaking through some of these psychological, I don't even know what you call them, psychological scar tissue.
And I will say, in a way that's way more useful at breaking that scar tissue than the current treatment modalities. Because if you go and you have some kind of trauma, or you have something that's broken the way that your system vibrates, you go to a doctor and they're basically like, well, we can give you this pill and you're going to take it for the rest of your life. But it seems like these sorts of transformative experiences actually allow you to work something out, which changes you persistently, as opposed to something that is,
it's like healing versus just tamping it down or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. In our theory, SSRIs work primarily by adding noise. So essentially there's kind of like three components to valence in our theory. We have a consonant, which feels good. We have dissonance, which feels bad. And then we have noise. And noise is kind of like this broad spectrum, feels neutral. It's neither good nor bad. So like, for example, if you're like right next to a construction site and you put a white noise machine, it actually sounds better, right? Because it's kind of like muffling or is diluting, blunting the harsh sounds of construction machinery. If you're at a symphony, or like at a concert, actually adding white noise will dilute the positivity of the experience. So a lot of people report kind of like blunting across the board on SSRIs, right? It's not only that their depression is blunted, they also say their happiness is blunted, their orgasms are blunted, their happiness is blunted. And we essentially suspect that it's kind of flattening the acoustics of the brain, essentially making it less resonant and more noisy, which, it's kind of like crystallizing the state in which you are, and blunting it, but it's not actually allowing you to really heal. And that is kind of like, a big concern.
Is there biophysical evidence for that? Or is it purely based on math?
No, this would be based on essentially kind of a consilience of a lot of hints. I do think like it can be proven ultimately.
Shiloh's throwing down the gauntlet here.
But, right now it's more hypothetical.
I'm trying to understand where we're at with it, like in terms of, it makes a lot of sense. I'm just curious if there's been attempts to measure that, or like how you unpack. Obviously, you hook up electrodes to the brain, you don't just see these nice little peaks everywhere. Like it's you have to transform it somehow to get the different frequency components. And I don't know. I obviously don't study this stuff. So
would you expect to see this in brainwaves?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to.
To some extent, yeah. I mean, you might. So it is the case that you find less broad scale synchronization in the brain with SSRIs, and that would essentially feed into this theory. Although there's many other things that might cause that. So that's why I think it's like kind of like just one hint, as opposed to like something that is like testing that specifically.
Yeah, of course. I mean, but I think that your question's broader than just the SSRI example, or you were specific to the SSRIs.
No, I was just asking about all of this, like what sort of preliminary studies were showing like what kind of frequency analysis was being done, or
because the SSRI theory makes a lot of sense intuitively from what I've seen from people. So I think that the next question is like, well, where would this be seen?
Yeah,
is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah, like how would you see this in the brain if you wanted to look at it and say, aha, it's because the actual electrical signals are in resonance in this state and they're chaotic in this other state.
Like I know the transcranial have you played with transcranial magnetic stimulation at all?
We actually have briefly. I mean, we had access to a lab that allowed us to play with it. There's something interesting to say about it, which is that usually TMS is thought of as, okay, how do we zap the brain to inhibit this part or excite this part? The TMS that we had access to was, in some sense, I guess like the entire software and hardware was like fixed in that paradigm. But actually, what I find much more interesting is continuous waveforms. So let's say like a sinusoidal waveform introduced by a TMS. The reason why that is not done and why instead like people zap your brain is that if you use a continuous waveform, it actually makes it very likely for your brain to start seizing, like you experience a seizure.
Because that's what a seizure does. Isn't that what a seizure does? Isn't that what
seizures are like states? Yeah, essentially very high energy states of resonance, where I mean it's like a repeating pattern that is self-reinforcing until it exhausts its energy. But yeah, with a TMS, it can induce a seizure. Now,
it sounds like more dangerous technology than I realized. It sounded so benign.
Right. Well, the thing is that I think it's actually good news. Like if TMS can induce a seizure, it actually means it's interfacing with the language of the brain, which ultimately I think it's, electromagnetic resonance. The trick is actually not, using zapping. I think like the trick is going to be how to use a low enough amplitude that you still get the potentially beneficial effects, but without the seizure actually happening.
So, but are the waveforms that you're talking about, so if you have a mathematically constructed waveform that you associate with a certain with a certain experience or a certain feeling or a certain valence, are those words interchangeable? Like feeling and valence.
Yeah, no, they're not. So valence is a very broad category. Here's the reason why. So there are things that have valence that I think definitely don't have a feeling in a way, at least not in a classic sense. I mean, like if we talk about like feelings as like, feeling happy, sad, upset, usually that has kind of like a bodily element and, something having to do with bodily prediction errors that I could get into. But essentially, yeah, it's kind of like an embodied feeling. Now, if you take LSD and you look at a piece of grass or something like that, it's very likely that it will start to symmetrify or like tessellate. you will kind of like the entire field may become kind of this symmetrical structure. Now that has a positive valence. Like there's something that feels good about it, but it's not a feeling in any traditional sense. It's kind of like you activated the ability for the visual cortex to generate pleasure and pain, but it's just a very exotic variant of it. So that's why I would say like that is valence. And I also talk about like exotic valence. Like valence appears in like very strange places, especially in other states of consciousness. Whereas I guess like I tend to use the word feeling as much more of the classic, embodied Darwinian emotions that we are acquainted with.
So is it kind of synesthesia in some way? Because the example that you use of the blade of grass, which normally wouldn't tessellate, and then you begin to see it form shapes. There is kind of a prismatic quality of the scene as you're already looking at it when you're sober, right? And so it seems like what's happening is that the thing that you already see is basically beginning to behave in some way. And so valence is, I'm sure, like, is there some kind of other word that is synonymous to valence that is not valence? Is it like...
Probably the closest would be well-being, perhaps, like the presence or absence of well-being.
Yeah, I can imagine it with music for sure. Like I don't have a ton of experience with LSD, but the music is like sometimes it can be very sad music, but still make you feel something that's very good. And so I could see feeling being on a different axis. But we were talking about
what I was saying is I was like, if you could take a certain pattern that produces a given valence and then use that waveform that you have predictively constructed and apply it to somebody's brain, would they feel that thing?
I would imagine yes. I mean, if you do it at a high enough resolution. There's one, I guess, like wrinkle or caveat here, which is that the precise shape of a person's brain actually determines what are the resonant modes of that brain, in a very similar way to like, why differently shaped objects sound different. Yeah, because it's the entire object that is vibrating, right? Like the sound that an object emits is a result of the entire shape, right? It's actually one of these cases where, in some sense, the whole is more than the sum of the parts, because all of the parts interact to produce this holistic behavior. And in the case of valence, is very much like that. But that also means that there's like some patterns of stimulation, or even like, let's say, transcranial magnetic stimulation getting internally, that will resonate with one brain, but may not resonate with another brain because they're shaped differently.
So do you imagine people will have to have their, like if they want to use this technology to put themselves in these frames of mind, to induce themselves into these frames of mind, will they have to develop their own program essentially ahead of time through these, through meditation or music or psychedelics? Or,
like where they can actually find the model like of the well-being state?
Oh. Be like, this is it. Take a picture here and then let's get back to this, through the technology later.
Essentially, we think of that as a calibration stage.
Yeah.
And in the experiments that we have run with the light, sound, and body vibration, we do see interpersonal variability. Like, for example, for one person, we may need to kind of do a frequency shift, like add like 5, shift everything 5 hertz so that it actually resonates, let's say, with the heart chakra. Yeah, talking in a very, very hippie way. But yeah, I mean, like these sort of things, like, yeah, it's very puzzling. It's like, okay, these frequencies, like, they feel great for somebody, but for you, you need a tiny adjustment. I don't think it's intractable. I mean, I think it's kind of like something you can do over 5 minutes with a proper protocol.
It's funny you mentioned like the chakras. We teach anatomy and physiology at a university remotely, and it was so funny because we were teaching like the central nervous system, but basically the topology of the nervous system, and we were like looking at just the different root nerves and stuff, and we're like, you know what, like this is basically the same idea as chakras. It's not that far off. I just think it's quite interesting how these ideas...
Well, because the vertebrae are divided according to areas of the body that they innervate. And so you can actually, there's a map of the body that you can get, and you can just like Google like.
Desmoderm.
Yeah, I think they're called Desmo.
No.
No, desmoderm is a laser spot. Don't go to desmoderm. It's basically like a map of where the sensations on the body
Desmosome, is that it?
align to. And it's exactly this thing where there is actually a physical structure that appears to be uniquely connected to various parts of the body. And because it is a physical structure, you would expect it to have resonance because it's not a chaotic structure. It's quite ordered. There's, crystalline bones within it, muscles that are perfect. The crystalline structure of muscles is incredible, of collagen. It's all of these things that are very ordered. So why wouldn't it have a resonance the same way that, any other object does?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty convinced a very big chunk of people's ill-being, in a sense, or low valence, comes from poorly calibrated nerve bundles that are, in a sense, like seizing or having like unpleasant dissonances and sending that to the brain. Whereas, if kind of like embodied meditations that like focus on tuning the chakras and so on, very much think actually what they're doing is making the oscillations in those nerve bundles more consonant through a process of annealing. Essentially, you energize it and you cool it, and you energize it and you cool it. And over time, essentially, it achieves, the lowest energy configuration, which is like the most consonant and symmetrical.
Those are called dermatomes in Western medicine. So Western medicine's got them too. They just call them something else. But it's basically the parts of your body that are controlled by different parts of the spinal column, or the spinal cord at that area, and the root nerves associated with it. Far out.
How long does this last?
Which thing?
So if you put somebody in this LSV system and you bring them to the state of bliss and you allow them to experience it and they process something, do you do follow-ups with them, a month out, a year out, whatever?
So to give you a sense of the scale, we've had like probably about like 100 or 150 people who go through the system. A few people, spontaneously said like, I processed a very deep trauma. And with those people, we did follow up, and like they seem to actually say like it continues to be valuable afterwards. In terms of, and I think like that's because a very deep transformation happened in that stage. And like, I mean, if you know somebody who, for example, processed something on MDMA or ketamine, like usually it sticks. I mean, like you did a deep transformation. And also think that's what the research is showing nowadays. I'm not sure if there's like any published study on MDMA specifically about that, but basically, psilocybin or LSD for depression, you see like these lingering effects that last months, essentially. In terms of like things that are not as enduring, the system does put you in a pretty different state for approximately like 2 hours, I would say. So like if you go to a party and like you participate in that, essentially people say like, for the rest of the party, I felt like much better, or like more aligned, felt more empathetic, kind of like effects of that sort, or reduced anxiety. But that does go away after like several hours.
Interesting. Okay. So, I mean, that makes sense because it's being used in this different way. I think people who process trauma or people that are so analytic about themselves have some kind of protocol that they've worked out for them that allows them to open a door that other people might not need or might not have or whatever, right? Because it's like somebody who's on the mission of figuring out traumas would understandably experience an experience like this in a completely different way than somebody who's like, no, I don't really process trauma. It would be weird if they came out as somebody who processed trauma on the other side of the experience.
Yes.
Go ahead. I want to change direction. So go ahead.
Yeah, that's all right. I want to get around to sort of like the technological ends goals of some of this stuff eventually, but if we can get to there in a minute.
Well, so I think that's reducing unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to go into that. So essentially I mentioned, we do three things, which is philosophy of mind, actual neuroscience, and then neurotechnology. So those would be kind of like the the various the various levels of the stack, the levels of abstraction. Philosophy is very abstract, whereas neurotechnology is like, super concrete. We're actually doing it here. But then we have like three missions, broadly speaking, which is, we call them the various pillars of QRI. So the first pillar is reduce or hopefully eliminate intense suffering. The second one is increase the baseline. And the third one is achieve new heights, essentially explore ultra blissful states of consciousness. Why these things? Well, the reason is we did a bunch of research on how to interpret the scales of pain and pleasure. And essentially we arrived at the conclusion that when people talk about like their pain, being in a 0 to 10 scale, that's actually a logarithmic compression of something that is exponential. In other words, with each increment in the scale, you really should be multiplying the pain by a constant as opposed to adding a constant. And, that explains why, when you get to kind of like 9 out of 10 pain or 10 out of 10 pain, it's actually like unimaginably horrible. Like it really is like, and in human level, it's actually impossible to, imagine how bad it is. And it turns out that, if you do kind of a utilitarian calculus here, if you kind of like count or try to quantify suffering in the world with this framework, it turns out that, something like 80% of the world's suffering is concentrated in just a few really bad experiences that people have. So kind of like after we realized that, we thought like, well, actually there seems to be a humanitarian, possible humanitarian emergency here that people are not realizing. Sorry, go ahead.
You gave a statistic, which is that 80% of the world's suffering is localized to few experiences. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So, just to give you an example, like, we are Valence realists. So, like, we actually believe that there is such a thing as like how good or bad you're feeling, and that there's like an objective score to it. I mean, most experiences are mixed, but roughly speaking, you can take the bad part of your experience, but take the good part and subtract the bad part, and that gives you approximately how good you're feeling. Because if you have a very mixed experience, as long as the pain and the pleasure are balanced, you actually might judge that to be kind of a neutral experience. If you kind of like try to give a number to this on the scale, we arrive at numbers like a tension headache, like the typical headache, hangover headache or something like that. The number that we may give to it is something like, okay, you experience like 100, what we call Dolors per second, DOLORES. It's essentially like
pain units.
Yeah, pain units, exactly. Something like 100 pain units per second. Well, triangulating through like a chain of painful experiences, people who've had like multiple painful experiences of different kinds, we can arrive at the approximate number that a migraine is between 100 and 1,000 times more painful than a typical headache. And then if you look at the even worse conditions like cluster headaches, which happen in 1 in 1,000 people, they're approximately 1,000 times more painful than a migraine. So, we're talking like really stratospheric levels of suffering to such an extent.
And you're able to quantify this because you followed the same person, and this unit is like Dolor, like pain.
Yeah, DOLORS, Dolors per second.
Yeah. Okay. So Dolor, like Dolorum or like Dolor. Yeah. Okay. So it's like sadness and pain, like negativity.
Yes. Negativity. Yeah.
So how do you? I guess I'm just still trying to think of it because. Do you have the same person report to you the scale for them of tension, migraine versus cluster, and that's how you evaluate the realm?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. The article, the main article here, I would recommend checking out. Is called "Logarithmic Scales of Pleasure and Pain." We have it online, where like we outline the full reasoning and the mathematical analysis that we used to arrive at these conclusions.
Okay.
But I mean, essentially, yeah, we did ask a bunch of people. Both in the general population and in kind of like the special populations, for example, cluster headache sufferers or kidney stone sufferers, to kind of like bring up what other things they also have experienced and essentially rate them and rank them and compare them.
And so if you have enough overlap of somebody who's had kidney stones and had a cluster headache, then and also had a tension headache, then all of a sudden you have something that you can use as a Venn diagram with somebody else and then kind of construct this tree.
Exactly. And you don't even need, all of the conditions being experienced by just one person, like because you can chain, right? As long as you have enough data, you can essentially the technique, we call it a deference graph analysis. It's kind of like, okay, this person says that this other condition is more painful. And like every 2%, 90% of the people who've had both experiences agree in that direction. And so you can take that deference as kind of like reliable. And then you take like this whole graph of all of the bad experiences that people have, and you look at what is the flow of deferences. And yeah, you essentially see things like, kidney stones and cluster headaches are like way up there relative to other stuff.
It's really interesting because that suggests, you often hear people be like, well, there's no such thing as an objective rating of pain or suffering. And I've always sat around and I've heard people say that, and I'm like, I do not agree with that. Like if you think that your pain at like stubbing your toe is equivalent to a cluster headache, that's because you haven't had a cluster headache.
What people usually say is they're like, my worst pain is as bad as your worst pain.
Objectively, I don't think that's possible. I don't.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the case, right? Because there are people who are hyperthymic, for example. We've interviewed a couple of them. Essentially, they never have a bad day in their life. And it seems to be genetic for a number of them. Like they're just born that way. And like, it would be very cruel to tell them that like, your worst day, which actually was a pretty good day, is as bad as the worst day of somebody with depression, right? Which, it's...
or like
so
a
like bad stuff, wait, hold on. So like bad stuff happens to them and they're just like, cool.
They essentially, like one person I interviewed, he actually has migraines. And when he's experiencing a migraine, he says, it's painful, but I'm still enjoying this experience a lot. I just would prefer that the migraine was gone because then it would be a more pure, good experience.
Wow, this is crazy. This is from, did you say thyroid?
Thymic. Like the
thymus. Like the...
Hyperthymic, yeah.
Wow,
right,
so it's
I'm gonna look into this.
That's crazy, the thymus.
Is this like synesthesia, something that you're just born with?
It seems like, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Yeah.
I would love, we talk about this all the time, right? Because I think that there's something about being human, which is about striving for something. And you can ascribe to the discipline where to strive is not the goal. I'm not a person who subscribes to that discipline. I have a podcast. I'm working towards something, obviously, so I'm striving. But the process of striving often hurts. And it seems like, in general, what prevents people from meeting success is the fact that at some point they get to the place where they're like, striving hurts too much.
Mm-hmm.
And then they stop. And then wherever they stop is where they land, and life goes on and it's different. But I think that it would be incredible to be somebody who could experience that and then just be like, but this isn't suffering. This is just striving. Like to experience pure striving with none of the suffering that's associated with it.
Yeah.
And so are you in search of offering people pure experiences?
Well, I mean, to some extent, yes. So like offering people relief from extreme suffering is number one. Second is helping people who are kind of like maybe they're not suffering intensely, but they are like suffering just enough so that they are very unproductive to kind of like, because that's kind of like a big delta. They're like, if you go, if the scale goes from -10 to +10, if you're like maybe on like -1 to +1, like you're still not going to be very productive. But then if you, go to like, okay, I'm 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10, then okay, that is kind of like super productivity window. And like, if we can take people reliably there, then yes, productivity would skyrocket, I think. And then the third one is figuring out how to deliver safe and reliable, ultra blissful experiences, which would be kind of like, the 10 out of 10, pleasure range. And I'm not talking about like, I mean, a lot of people might say like, well, then you're just advocating for people to try heroin or meth or something like that. But actually, like even those are not as good as what you can obtain either via meditation or with other drugs. Like the one drug that actually seems to maximize consciousness and bliss the absolute most by a very, very large margin is the substance that is called 5-MeO DMT. Essentially, it is like a profound mystical spiritual experience where like, the sense of well-being, it's astronomical. I mean, it's like superhuman. If you have a good trip, and that is the problem, because you could also have a bad trip and it actually could be extremely negative. And in our theory, essentially, whether you have a bad trip or not has to do with whether you instantiated a state of high consonance or dissonance. So this is actually kind of a pretty tractable thing. Like, for example, putting a person through an LSV session before a 5-MeO DMT experience is, I think, like very likely to strongly bias in the favor of a really positive experience. And that's the sort of thing that we would love to be able to offer people.
How difficult is it to do this kind of work? Because I mean, all of these many of the substances that you've talked about, I think all maybe, are highly controlled substances. Like Oregon has mostly legalized stuff. Are you guys
but it's not like we can just like walk to the gas station and buy some either.
No, give it 5 years.
No. So no, I mean, that's totally right. So we ourselves don't actually give substances to people. Like we're a fairly tiny research group, and instead what we do, there's like 3 ways, really. A is collaborate with other labs who do have the permission to essentially, administering interesting substances and gathering neuroimaging data. The second one is we have this thing we call the phenomenology club. So essentially, people who are really, really experienced on a particular domain. For example, I know 3 people completely independently of each other, who all of them tried 5-MeO DMT every day for 6 months. Like, I don't know why they chose to do that independently, but like that is the case. And so we interview them. Like we have this event like every couple of weeks, where like we all gather and like really kind of like go very deep into trying to figure out like the structural properties of those experiences, and figuring out like, okay, are there like patterns, or what is kind of the main effects here. And then the third one is kind of this setup we call a think tank model, where essentially, with a wide enough network of like, smart people who are scientists or researchers, who, might do some exploration on the side. In a sense, like as a collective, they have like a much, greater ability to make sense of these experiences than, let's say, just an individual researcher, or for example, like how it's used nowadays in academia, which is you give a substance to a lot of people who have never experienced it. And then you ask them to fill a questionnaire, which is, not necessarily going to actually, tell you like new insights. So
the people from that experimental group, do they report, are they able to bring something back to the rest of the population? Like, can they bring something salient back, or is this something that someone has to experience for themselves?
I think you can bring a lot. I mean, to some extent, some things have to be experienced to be known.
But like for their benefit, like like, can you learn something that's transmissible from those experiences?
Like become a teacher when you come back?
Yeah, something like that.
I think so. I mean, there's like a couple of examples. There's some fairly famous Buddhist teachers who now they're kind of like more freely admitting this, that they actually made a lot of progress through psychedelics. I mean, one person who's like pretty open about this, and you can find him on YouTube explaining this, is Michael Taft, who's like a very well regarded meditation teacher. And I really love his meditation, guided meditation YouTube. He says that the way he became quote unquote awakened, and we can go into what awakening is, was through a combination of meditation and then like really serious LSD exploration, where essentially he had 700 LSD trips, high dose LSD trips.
And they kind of like showed him what to look for in the meditation or something like that, or he knew it helped him.
I think you see something, like you understand something about the structure of everything. Like, and I think that when you
this damn word structure is
there is this sense that everything is made of one cloth, and you come to know that there is a cloth there, and that it has texture and appearance, and all of it comes together to give you this kind of experience. And I imagine that going back through over and over and over again would give you the opportunity to to just look at it very closely because it's so fleeting. If you do it once or twice, you look at it and you're just like, whoa, and then it goes away, it's gone. But if you would do it 700 times, you can just, it's almost like a magic eye picture.
Yeah, that would be a very big component of it. And at a even like more low level, kind of like physiological, microscopic level, I think it's a phenomenon of annealing, that essentially you're heating up, energizing the nervous system, and then like getting it to cool down. And if you do that in a, together with equanimity, you're going to be cooling it down in kind of an equanimity compatible configuration. And I mean, it is one of those things that, as with meditation, doing it once is not enough. You actually need to, do the annealing cycle a bunch of times to actually do more finer and finer smoothing of the fabric of experience until you get something that is like actually perfectly smooth and it snaps into perfect symmetry.
I guess I was also like kind of asking, are these people like coming across the same sort of symbolisms and stuff too? Like, are they like, oh man, the machine elves told me about the secrets of the universe again? And like, because sometimes I have these dreams where I'm like, I have this amazing realization, but then I wake up and I'm like, oh, damn it. What was that? I was just thinking of something, like, I just figured something out. And I'm like often left when I wake up with this feeling of like, oh, I just figured something out and I can't remember what it was. Or are people able to like bring that back? I'm sorry to like keep sticking on this. I just am curious if there's like, yeah.
Well, DMT is kind of special in that, like, DMT in particular is really difficult to bring back. And essentially, the memories that you form on DMT are very fleeting. But that improves with practice. That is like the overall takeaway. Like, people who get to the level of like having done like 500 or more DMT trips, they can actually describe everything they experienced. It's kind of like, maybe early on they were like too, mind blown by what they were seeing and feeling. But now there's kind of like enough of a repertoire of experience that they can say like, oh yeah, okay, that was kind of like in the third trip and a little bit of the fifth trip combined, and they can tell you about it. And another very key piece of information here is that we focus on the phenomenal character, like what the experience feels like, as opposed to the meaning or what we might describe as the semantic content. And I think like that's the main feeling that we see in psychedelic culture and cultural interpretations of exotic states of consciousness, is that exactly like the thing that people can relate to others who haven't had the experience is more towards semantic information, right? It's like, oh, I met this alien and they took me to the spaceship and they showed me around. Whereas like from our point of view, that actually doesn't matter very much. The thing that matters way more is like, yes, but what was the wallpaper symmetry group expressed in the texture of the walls of the spaceship? Like, and what was the frequency of vibration of it? And was there impedance matching between the walls? So like, that's the sort of thing.
Because you believe that's like at the heart of the healing process that you're really trying to seek and build technology for.
Even when a machine elf might show you a technology or something, like if it actually heals you, it will be through a mechanism of annealing, through a mechanism of essentially symmetrifying your field of awareness that provide a kind of a scaffold for connections to be formed in that kind of like very healthy, very energized state. And I mean, it bears to be said that like if you have a very unpleasant DMT experience or LSD experience, it may actually anneal a neurotic state of consciousness.
Oh no, that sounds terrifying. That sounds freaking terrifying.
Well, that's why set and setting is important, right? People talk about this, and you said that there is this necessity to create an environment that encourages it to be a good experience, because when you start mucking around in the brain, you have basically no guarantee that you're 100% of the time going to hit that target that you want hit. It's just, but I think that that's the case with a lot of experiences. Anything that you do changes you, right? And so if you're doing it through this external stimulation form, or you're doing it because you've just made a choice, is it really different?
Yeah, I wonder if it's like, I wonder if there's like levels to this. Like if DMT is like, it's like almost a boss fight. And if you have no psychedelic experience, if it's just like completely unadvisable, or is it not like that at all, where like people who don't have any psychedelic experience can also have good productive experiences on these really intense substances?
I think the mindset of building up to it is the right one. And I would say for like not only between substances but also like doses, and like if you try DMT, I'm not advocating that anybody does, but like if you do, like I actually do recommend like try 1 milligram, then try 2, then try 3, and then 4, and then 5, and like really go slowly, because I mean every single dose is fascinating. Like there's no reason to jump into something extraordinarily bizarre if already at a small dose there's actually quite a lot of like mysterious things going on.
I think that's good advice for any psychedelics too, by the way. I mean, some people have like the most, what would we say? Can we call weed like the most innocuous psychedelic substance? But I mean, it can be super, super bad experience for some people, right? I mean, there's this, there's this hilarious Curb Your Enthusiasm with where Larry David takes a hit of this joint and just goes in the bathroom and stares at himself in the mirror for like 5 minutes and just hates himself, and it's like, yeah, well, it doesn't have to be a really strong substance to, really put you in a place that you're not used to being in. And
no. And I would say there is definitely a scale between substances. I mean, I would say, yeah, weed is on the gentle side, except, high doses, it can get really crazy, but it is more on the gentle side. Then I would probably place like phenethylamines, like 2CB and, mescaline and things like that. Then the thing is like LSD and psilocybin, then DMT. So like, yeah, probably DMT is kind of a boss fight here. But then there's a wrinkle because there's also 5-MeO DMT. And 5-MeO DMT is actually so extreme.
Oh, so this is like a special version of DMT. I'm sorry, I didn't totally understand.
Yeah, it's its own thing. And like consistently, if you have like a strong 5-MeO DMT experience, what people report is absolutely no other psychedelic experience.
I see. Oh my goodness.
Different
I see.
category. Yeah.
Okay.
It's fascinating. And so for the reducing of unnecessary suffering, this is a project that attempts to take this everything that you've learned in this study and with understanding these brain states and to be able to lead people to minimize negative states, which we kind of haven't talked about that, right? We've talked about the way that you can create these positive states. And is that just a side effect is minimizing negativity just a side effect of working on the positive?
No. In fact, some of the solutions for eliminating negative extremes are not very interesting. I mean, they're not very interesting, but they're like really effective. And like that is actually what matters there. And that's why we call them pragmatic solutions for extreme suffering, that they are actually not very flashy, but it's just like, somebody has to do it. To give you an example, kidney stones is like one of the things that came up as kind of like, okay, one of the extreme versions of suffering. And they're extremely common. And like probably, they add up a huge amount of pain to the world's reservoir of suffering. And there's like some fancy ways of kind of like tackling it, shockwave, lithotripy, like where you essentially, kind of like break it down directly. That would be kind of like, fancy, interesting way. But there's actually like what we are assembling right now is like evidence that this South American plant called Chanca piedra, it's not only effective at getting rid of kidney stones, but more than that, it seems to be really effective at preventing kidney stones. And I think like that is where probably the biggest bang for the buck will be, where essentially, I have it right here, where you essentially might take one of these like every week or every month. And then, when you're like 20 years old, you start, and then you will just never have any kidney stone ever in your life. And it would be just so incredibly cheap. I mean, essentially, we're talking about something like less than $5 per person per year, which just by, medical costs alone is already saving a huge amount of money because, going to the hospital and get kidney stone procedures is very, very costly. Not to speak of all the pain that would be prevented. So that's one. I mean, we have a portfolio of things that we actually have kind of like stumbled upon, but that really nobody is pursuing. So our move here is kind of like an incubator move. I mean, right now we are at the stage of building up the case for it, kind of like giving talks and publishing articles about this paradigm, like, hey, like pain is real. There's actually levels of pain. And very likely most of the suffering comes from a few experiences. and here's the set of like most promising interventions we have. And then actually, founding companies for all of them, I think is going to be the way to go.
Very cool. And so that, I guess, leaves us just with the question of ultra bliss. Like, so if you can raise the baseline, how do you get, because it sounds like the technology that you've described to this point, I don't want to say that it's expensive, but it's not, I can't imagine it being sold, for $20 somewhere.
No, the full setup is very likely, in the $1,000 range, and it's going to be difficult to bring it like a lot lower than that. Maybe $500 could be the minimum.
Could there be like shared resources somehow?
Yeah, like our YMCA has hydro massage beds, and there's 3 of them, and they're very unwieldy and awkward. But I can imagine them having a room of like the ultra bliss room. For $15 a month, you can get some bliss.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a model that we've been exploring. Because direct to consumer, I don't think it's going to work for the reasons you point out. The ultra blissful experiences would be more. So there is 5-MeO DMT. I would put like MDMA kind of like up there as well. MDMA is like very unreliable, unfortunately, because you get used to it. Like tolerance to it is super, super strong. So you can only really have something like 10 MDMA trips, because after that, your brain essentially doesn't respond to it in the same way, suggesting neurotoxicity. So it's not good for you in that sense. But we do suspect, and also based on some preliminary data, that there's actually like MDMA analogs that produce the same feeling but are not neurotoxic. And we know several people working on that. But then the way in which it actually connects the most with the light, sound, and body vibration is in terms of accelerating meditation progress. Like that is probably where the bulk of being able to access ultra blissful states is. And also because we know people who are quote unquote awakened. I mean, there's kind of there probably could be a whole podcast of like demystifying awakening.
We should do that. I would like that.
And if you're curious, I can put you in touch with people that I think are meet the mark. There's like very technical descriptions of like what it means, depending on the tradition. But the one that I follow the most is in Buddhism. There's the model of the fourth path. So essentially, people who achieve like fourth path, where essentially they don't experience fear anymore. They're not afraid of dying. They're not afraid, and also they're able to not translate pain into suffering. Like essentially that equation becomes really easy for them. Like they can experience tremendous pain, but it doesn't manifest as like further trauma or neuroticism. And that is really radical. I mean, like talking to a couple of people who are in that state, they say that their moment to moment everyday life, since they experience fourth path, is better than candy flipping. Like they're at a much better state than, even combining LSD and MDMA and having a great trip. Their moment to moment just naturally is just super elevated well-being. And, it may take something like 5,000 hours or 10,000 hours of intense meditation to get there. But I think that with something like the light, sound, and body vibration, we might be able to cut that down to, 500 hours or something like that, because you also have kind of the harmonization coming from the setup as well.
If you don't experience fear, would you like not jump out of the way if a tiger came around the corner? And
No. They definitely experience like functional fear. It's just that it doesn't. They might describe it as it doesn't get to their core. Like there's nothing that gets affected by it.
Like they don't experience anything beyond
they're not, gripped by it.
Yeah, like I need to move away from the tiger. It's not, oh my God, I can't believe that happened.
I can't believe there was a tiger just now. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
It is. It is kind of aspirational to.
I mean, what's really annoying is like almost everything that I'm afraid of never happens. Like that's my experience with fear. Like almost everything, and so I can imagine being able to train that. If you could actually train some distance between the fear and what you make of it or something like that.
I think that's what meditation does.
Yeah, probably. Oh man.
This has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
I think that are we two? No, we're an hour and a half. I thought we were 2.5 hours in. I was like, time flies. No, I would love to have you back again and talk about awakening and all of the other things that you see and find. And it's been very, very interesting.
Totally. No, it's been great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's very much our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andres.